The official diagnostic criteria for ADD, unlike the model that I've showed you, do not include anything about regulating emotion. But those of us who do research on this find consistently that people with ADHD often report they have trouble managing emotion. And that's something that we feel is really important to understand as one aspect of the executive functions impaired in ADHD. Now, when we're talking about emotions, remember there's a wide range. They're the primary emotions. This is the work of Antonio Damasio, which you see listed on the left: fear and anger, disgust, surprise, and sadness and happiness. And then there are what they call the social emotions, which have to do with interaction with other people: sympathy and embarrassment and shame and pride and jealousy and gratitude, indignation and contempt. And Damasio makes a distinction that I think is useful. He said emotions, that's the word he wants to use to describe very automatic body reactions to thoughts or what we see in a situation. And basically what they do, they're unconscious, they happen very fast, and they give us a signal as to whether this event, this thought, this interaction is likely to bring something painful that we don't want or something pleasurable that we do want. And then he distinguishes this from feelings, which are more sensations and thoughts that register emotion. So it's like the emotion is underneath, the feeling is the surface manifestation of it. Emotions tend to be not conscious. One can be afraid and not even know it. One can be angry and not be fully aware of it. And at the same time, there are feelings that may correspond to that may be obvious to other people who read our facial expressions or know our ways, or they can be very private and not easily accessible. What we know is that there's a lot of data. This is a study recently done in Europe. Over 1,000 kids with ADHD assessed for emotional lability, difficulty in managing these emotions. And what they found was when they compared them with a group of controls, it was over a standard deviation and severe problems with emotions bouncing around. That is the top 25%, far more common in kids with ADHD. The rating scales that are published, the old Utah criteria that Paul Wender had for adults with ADHD, affective lability, hot temper, emotional reactivity were very much a part of it. Connor's rating scale for kids has 12 items that are supposed to be the best ones for predicting ADHD. Easily frustrated is one of them. Where do you find that in the DSM-4? His adult scale has 4 items that are emotional control among the 12 best for identifying ADHD in adults. Barclay's system of executive function includes self-regulation of emotion, affect, motivation, and arousal as a big part of executive functions. And he's just published an article which is very, very good, I think, in terms of the history of ADHD and understanding emotion. And basically what he says was that until 1960, emotional impulsiveness and difficulty controlling emotion were parts of what people thought of as ADHD. Then they got knocked out, and yet we know that kids and adults with ADHD tend to show low frustration tolerance. They get pissed off very easily, discouraged very easily. They're often impatient, quick to anger, easily excited, and he makes a good argument in this paper for how we ought to get that back in our list of what are the core symptoms of ADHD. The rating scales I've published talk about how emotion takes over too much of the thinking or feeling of persons with ADHD, although it's not always the same emotion. Different people, different examples. But let's talk a little bit about emotions generally, and then I'll get to some specific examples. Some emotions, remember now, the emotions are underneath, the feelings are and motivations are usually more conscious. Our turn-ons, interest and attraction and desire and devotion. And then there's the turn-off stuff like boredom or frustration or anger or fear. And all of these vary in terms of how much and toward what or toward whom. And it depends on how the person sees the situation and what's the context and what file of memories they have associated with this situation. But there are a lot of these things that really happen automatically. For example, I have a problem when I go to the UK, and I go over there pretty frequently. I can never remember which direction the cars are coming from when I go to cross the street. Because I'm used, they all drive on the wrong side of the road over there. And I had a situation where I was getting ready to cross the street, and I stepped down off the curb, and suddenly I found myself standing back up on the curb with my heart beating really fast, feeling I was going to jump out of my chest in shortness of breath, and whoosh, a big bus went rolling right by. I did not say, oh, there's a bus coming, oh, I'd better jump back, oh, I'm in danger. I moved first and then recognized what had happened to me, or almost happened to me. And I would offer that as an example of how one can have a reaction that you're not aware of what's going on until after it's occurred. And also that danger or importance of something is in the eye of the beholder. It's based upon one's own personal, private, secret files of previous experience. But often it's not just one of these emotions or another. Often they're blended and layered and mixed. And the context makes a big difference as well. Let me give you an example. When I'm flying, I've traveled to 40 different countries in the last 10 years, and so I spend a lot of time on airplanes. Not quite as bad as George Clooney in Up in the Air, but something like that. And I had experience, often my wife travels with me when I travel internationally. And American Airlines has a thing where as you're about an hour or two out from your landing at an international flight, they bake cookies in the front galley, these chocolate chip cookies and oatmeal raisin cookies. And they fill the whole plane with the smell of these delicious cookies, but only the people riding in business class get any. It's not good for people who are riding in the back of the bus. But I was riding in the business section, and they were getting ready to bring. I saw them coming down. I smelled them coming, and then saw that they were distributing them up the front in the section. And it was at a time when my wife and I, both of us are kind of chubby, and we were trying to lose weight, and we were on this diet. And so, this was something that was certainly a no-no in terms of the diet, but my wife was asleep. And so I had a decision to make. The flight attendant was coming down offering these plates, and they had milk with them yet, too. And they looked awfully good, and I was kind of hungry. And I was thinking, well, there'd be no decision to make if my wife were awake, because I would just have to say, no, I'm on a diet. I can't have any of that stuff. Thank you. But since she was asleep, I was pretty sure I sort of looked, and she was pretty soundly asleep. When they got there, the flight attendant, I didn't really make up my mind until they actually had the plate extended toward me, and of course I took it. But not only did I take my cookie, but I also took one for her. At which point, I quickly gobbled them up, got the plates together, and very diligently walked up to the galley and turned in the evidence before she woke up. But I would offer that as an example of how emotions sometimes conflict, because I really did want to have the cookie, but I also really did want to stick to my diet and try and lose some weight because I knew it was too fat. Now, obviously, this is a battle not yet won, and it may never be, but the fact is our emotions are often conflictual. And it's important, too, what the context is. That in the situation, had I been alone on the flight and my wife wasn't there at all, there would have been no question about eating the cookie. I would have eaten it. But I probably would have only gotten one. With her awake, there would have been no question about it, because her presence made me much more conscious of the fact that I shouldn't be eating the cookie. But you heard how it came out. There are two aspects to emotion in the way we understand it psychologically. One is related to temperament. There are some kids who are just born with a different kind of temperament than other kids are. And it's not like one is good, the other's bad. It's just they're different. And yet some with ADHD are chronically too intense. And there are others with ADHD who don't have that much intensity. And they can only feel stimulated if they're doing something which is really living on the edge. These are the people who make great hockey players. These are the people who make great rock climbers. These are the people who love racing cars and bikes and anything else they can find. Because that turns them on in a way that other things won't. And this is all tied to the emotion as it comes bottom up. It's built into the organism, into the temperament of the person. And then there is, on top of, and of course, if you get stoned too much, that may be a way of calming down some of this excessive intensity, but there are other problems that come with it. But it's that emotion which energizes everything we do. Ken Dodge wrote years ago, he said, all information processing is emotional. Emotion's the energy level that drives and organizes and amplifies and attenuates cognitive activity. And the emotional, we know now very well from the research that's been done, emotional value is automatically, unconsciously assigned to anything we see, like that bus coming around the corner, without our even thinking about it. Later we may elaborate on it, but how threatening, important, or interesting is this? That happens automatically. But there also are problems with not being able to turn on where the weaker sensitivity to rewards is an issue. Activation and arousal for getting something done and mobilizing is essential, but if you don't have the alertness or the interest, there's no action. And there are many people with ADD where the problem has to do with apathy and difficulty in getting cranked up at all. And you see, there are some situations where it's hot motivation, very immediate, intense motivation. And there are others where it's cool, where it's not so immediate, but the person still cares about it. Let me give you a few examples of how some of these things work. This is a student who was talking to me about how he had taken a psych course where they'd been studying rats in Skinner boxes, and how they were looking at reinforcement schedules, and the way it worked is that if you throw a pellet into the dish every time the rat presses a bar, the rat will keep pressing the bar as long as you keep the pellets going. And he said then we studied some other rats where they'd keep pressing the bar and you'd only give them a pellet every once in a while. And he said it was very clear from all these studies that if you kept the rat on one pellet every time he pushed, he would keep at it, but then he'd stop immediately once you stopped giving the pellets. But the rats who were only getting the pellets every once in a while, they'd keep on hoping and keep on pressing the bar a lot longer before they gave up. And he said, I thought about it, and I'm one of those rats that has to have a pellet every time I press the bar. And if the payoff isn't coming to me pretty steadily, pretty quickly, I give it up. And he says, that's why I have to withdraw from so many courses, that I'm not able to keep up my effort. If it's not something that's really interesting or steadily rewarding, I can't do it. The reward system, as I mentioned in the earlier talk, is often not quite as sensitive to long-term rewards in the case of persons with ADHD. Now, the other thing we need to think about, though, is top-down regulation of control, and that is that in addition to that bottom-up, where we've all got a certain amount of intensity, and for some people it's really intense on some things and others not, there's also the top-down, the ability to put the lid on it. This is when you're driving your car and you've got two kids in the back seat who are fighting with each other and you're in heavy traffic. There is a point where they keep fighting with each other and screaming and fussing with one another, where the driver, the parent, is seriously tempted to turn around and backhand both of the kids. However, when you're in heavy traffic and you know that turning around to backhand these kids who deserve to be backhanded is likely to cause a motor vehicle accident, what you do is you talk through your teeth, saying, you will pay for this when you get home. And then you keep on driving. You don't stop and turn around. That ability to be able to keep your cool and not stop what you're doing and turn around and hit them in the middle of driving is an example of top-down control. It's imposing control on how you express the emotion, because right now this is not the time or the place to do it. It's the sort of thing where you've got a boss who's talking to you in a way which is really very rude and inconsiderate, doesn't appreciate what you've been doing, and it occurs to you that there are a number of gestures which might be appropriate to be able to communicate your frustration to the boss at this time, and a number of very brief phrases that could communicate your intentions to them, but you know damn well you better not open your mouth and say it because you're going to be without a job. That's top-down control. And many people with ADHD report that for certain kinds of emotion, they do have trouble maintaining their control. But let me give you a few examples of how some of these emotion things operate. This is a salesman that I saw one time, and he was talking about how he was sitting in a diner late afternoon having lunch, and the guy in the booth behind him had a sandwich, and there are not many people in the restaurant. This guy's chewing, and he said he's chewing like a chomp, chomp, chomp on every bite. He said there was something about that noise that was driving me nuts. It was like a computer virus got into my head and just gobbled up all the space, and that's all I could think about was that damn noise. I'm sitting there with my fist clenched, seriously thinking about getting up and smacking this guy in the mouth because he was chewing so obnoxiously loud. He said I didn't do it. I didn't want to get arrested. But if I'd been at home, I would have been yelling at somebody or would have walked out of the room. He said then after a few minutes, he's still making the same noise, and then it didn't bother me anymore. He says, stuff like that happens to me all the time, where there'll be some little frustration, the kind of thing that on a scale of frustration, it goes from 0 to 10. Most people would say, that's a 0 or a 1. At the most, maybe it's a 2. It'll hit me like it's a 7 or an 8 or a 9. And sometimes, he said, I'll make a big fuss about it. And other times, I don't say anything, but I feel like, smashing something or breaking something. And then usually it's over after a couple of minutes. But he said it's not always that way. So the day before that, I was in the office, and I'm walking down the hall, and a friend of mine who works in the other department came around the corner. He's walking toward me, reading some papers as he's walking. And I hadn't seen him for a long time. So as we approached each other, I stopped and said, hey, what's up? How you doing? I figured we'd stop and chat for a minute. He looks up, says hi, puts his head down, keeps on walking. He said, now, most people will blow it off in a minute and figure he was in a hurry. He's got to get to a meeting or something. We'll talk later. He said, not me. He said, that happened at lunchtime. I got nothing done for the rest of the day. I spent all afternoon thinking, can I do something to piss him off? Or maybe I did something to offend somebody in his department and they're all angry with me. Or maybe I'm just the kind of person nobody likes and nobody will tell me about it. I couldn't get it out of my head. Other people, it's not like that. It's like they'll get an idea in their head of something they want to do or something they want to get or something they want to buy. And all of a sudden that wish takes on such strong urgency that the feeling is, I've got to have it now. And it almost doesn't matter how expensive it is or how inconvenient it's going to be for them or for somebody else, or whether they're going to be spending time and money now for this that they know they need for something else tomorrow that's more important. There's just this relentless push. And by God, they're going to do everything they can to get it, and they'll keep at that until they either get it or they hit a brick wall. But even if they get it, it doesn't help that much, because usually by then there's something else they're looking for. Other people, it's not like that. They give up too quickly. They don't get something right away, and the first way they try it, they just say, well, it's just not going to work. Forget about it. This sucks. Other people, it's not like that. I was talking with somebody the other day, and they said they were driving down the expressway, and they're in the left-hand lane, and on the right-hand lane, there's a semi, a big lorry beside them. And they're cruising about 65 miles an hour. On the other side, there's a cement barrier. And he said, we're driving along about 65 miles an hour. This truck starts to pull over a little bit. Didn't get into my lane, got me thinking about how big his truck was, how small my car was. And pretty soon I'm thinking to myself, what would happen if he didn't see me and he pulled over and swooshed me against the Jersey barrier? He said, pretty soon I'm not just thinking about it, I'm running a very vivid movie in my head, imagining exactly how it would be if that truck came over and smashed into my car and crumpled the car, and sharp pieces of metal are sticking into me, and the car's getting dragged along the Jersey barrier, and I'm bleeding to death, and then the truck jackknifes, and cars and trucks behind us are hitting us repeatedly, and there's this massive traffic jam, and it takes a long time to get the rescue squad in to cut me out of the car, and by then I've bled to death, and they have to call my family and tell them I'm dead. And all this while I'm trying to drive the car 65 miles an hour down the road. And he says, stuff like that happens to me all the time. Where, some things are basically going along okay. And I start thinking, what would happen if this happened? Or what would happen if that happened? And pretty soon I'm not just thinking about it, I'm into it. Now, it's not like everybody with ADD has all this stuff, but many with ADD will have one or some combination of a few of these things. But what they have in common is that computer virus in the head thing, where the emotion hits, whether it's the hurt feelings or the pissed off, or I've got to have it now, or forget this, it's not going to work, or what ifs, just gobbles up all the space in the head. And it's very difficult for the person to be able to put it in perspective, put it to the back of their mind, and get on with what it is they've got to do. And it's this kind of dysregulation of emotion, the difficulty in being able to impose top-down control, that is particularly difficult for people with ADHD.